He's the comic world's most famous sporting superstar, a man whose name is synonymous with triumph against the odds on the football field. Roy of the Rovers has survived marriage problems, attempts on his life, managed the England squad, and signed Martin Kemp and Steve Norman from Spandau Ballet. All of the while sporting a ridiculous range of haircuts. This is Roy's story.
Everyone read it. If you didn't read it, you couldn't hold a conversation when you went in.
Real Roy the Rover stuff is a real catchphrase that you'll often hear John Motson even still say now on Match of the Day on a Saturday night.
Roy was always your own hero, so people could always identify with Melchester Rovers as being their team.
It became an institution. It became massive. Footballers were reading the stories. There were great storylines.
He represents all that's best about British football.
Roy was number one. If you said to the kids, right, vote for your favourite footballer and Roy races there, Roy would get more votes than anybody. So where did Roy rate? Number one by a mile.
Roy the Rovers was real. I was his best friend. I wasn't his editor.
He's definitely there in the top 10. He's survived the 50s, 60s, 70s.
That's how big Roy the Rovers was, and that's how big Roy the Rovers could be today. I admired the American comics so much, and I used to like the Hulk, and I used to like Superman, and I used to like Batman, I used to like and they all became comics figures who became real, and they made films about them. People believed in them. Adults went to see them because they were real, and I said, we must get a comic figure here that is real. And I talk to people now, and I say, what did you think of Roy? And these are people in their 60s, and they said, I always thought he was real. I always thought he was real. He was a real person.
Roy Race, also known as Roy of the Rovers, was actually created by Frank S. Pepper in 1954, another entry into the popular field of boys' football comics, a genre that had already spawned such luminaries as the hard man Johnny Dexter, Tommy's Troubles, and the footballer who wouldn't stay dead.
Frank wanted Roy to sort of he didn't want him to be an immediate first team hero, England international. He wanted him to be sort of a clean cut schoolboy who made his way through the ranks.
Roy was the original boys' football hero. He was well behaved on the pitch and off the pitch. When he first appeared in Tiger, he would say in instalment 1, this year we're going to try and win the FA Cup. And you knew that in the last instalment of that story they would win the FA Cup.
It wasn't a kid's comic, it was above that. Everyone read it.
Every time a reader wrote to us, they had to say what their favourite stories were, and Roy the Rovers was always the number one title.
Roy, he had 100%. 100%. You can't get better than that. He rated number one. We're getting letters in from young children sent by their fathers asking if they could have Roy's autograph. And they began to question whether maybe they had something, because this wasn't happening for Billy Boots or Bobby Dazzler. No one was asking for their autographs because the kids realised they were comic figures.
Part of Roy's success were his revolutionary storylines. Among these, the inclusion of girls in the pages of a boys' football comic. Roy even went as far as marrying one of them.
Up until then, the writers and the editors had taken a real stance that there'd be no women in the. It was sort of a boys' comic. It was a male comic, if you will, and they would have no women in the storylines.
He married Penny, who was the club secretary. Although she was the first wag, she was very conservative in her attitude, and I think nowadays it would change. And it might well be that Penny Race would start doing modelling work or something like that.
Obviously, I had to play the football match beforehand, so all the players turned up at church in their football kit, having just won the cup final against Oldfield.
It was the ideal husband-wife situation, and more so because after a year, Penny gave birth to twins.
Roy named after Roy himself, and Melinda from the Mel from Melchester.
So he became a father of 2 children and was the first boys' comic hero to become a father.
With a wife and young family to support, in 1976, Roy was promoted from the pages of Tiger to captaining his own comic, Roy of the Rovers. Issue 1 of the new magazine came with a free football chart and a special message to readers from the Duke of Edinburgh.
The management said they wanted me to produce a new football comic, and my immediate reaction was, let's call it Roy of the Rovers. But there was some consternation that it was too long a title. But I pointed out that News of the World was the same number of words, and Roy of the Rovers had the same ring to it.
What they wanted to do was start to bring in some real sort of storylines that maybe mirrored what was going on in the real world, if you will.
As time went on, children became more sophisticated, and they wanted a much more true-to-life situation. So we had to make it that Roy of the Rovers team, Melchester, had crises like any other club.
Roy's personal life continued to be a focus of the new comic, as a spate of disasters rocked Melchester. In the 1970s and 80s, Roy and the team had to contend with everything from earthquakes to assassination attempts.
I was a great fan of Dallas, and in Dallas, the TV series, JR, the central character, was shot mysteriously one night. And they'd built into the storyline before the shooting lots of suspects. And we decided to do the same thing in Roy of the Rovers.
There was a number of people that were implicated.
We featured the actual shooting on the front cover. And immediately the media took off again. It was tremendous publicity. Except for Roy. Well, it was for Roy, but he didn't know much about it because he was in a coma at the time. He was actually shot by Elton Blake, who was a TV actor who had played the part of Roy in a TV series and got very jealous of Roy getting more publicity than him. So it was Elton Blake who did it.
But it wasn't over yet for Roy.
Melchester Rovers were on a summer tour to Basran in the Middle East. And they seemed to finish that tour without any great problems.
They were crossing Basran when Melchester Rovers on, I think they were playing an exhibition game, and they got sort of curtailed in a coup that was being undertaken in the country.
As they got on their coach on the way back to the airport, someone who had a bomb in his car crashed into the coach. And there was an enormous explosion, and quite a few of the Melchester team perished.
The accident happened, and there was 8 players that sadly lost their lives at that stage.
Melchester being Melchester and Roy being Roy, they kept a stiff upper lip, kept going, and started winning again, and got over the great explosion which devastated the team so much.
If that wasn't enough, the worlds of Melchester Rovers and pop music were about to collide.
We brought Spandau Ballet, 2 members of Spandau Ballet, into the story, which it worked as far as we were concerned, but the readers were a little bit suspicious how musicians could be good footballers.
Martin Kemp and Stephen Owen were both fans of the Roy of the Rovers story.
I thought, well, this is a great publicity idea, let's invite them. Do they want to play in the team? Never thinking for a moment that they would do.
Martin Kemp was on the Frank Skinner show a couple of years ago. Spoke about how he couldn't wait to get the newspaper shop. He was on a Saturday morning to get the latest Roy of the Rovers comic when he was in it. It was just like being back in his childhood.
It was great fun to do, and it was something that we could try. And I wouldn't do it again, but it was good publicity.
Then, in 1993, the Melchester Rovers, now sponsored by TSB, faced one challenge too many: cancellation.
The circulation figures for the Roy of the Rovers comic had really dipped. I think there was something around 20,000, as opposed to sort of 200,000 that they were, for a few years earlier.
I think it was a time when children's comics were all suffering on the circulation front. Computers, computer games were playing a great part in children's lives, whereas 10, 20 years earlier, the high spot for a child is when the comic was delivered through the letterbox.
With readership falling to a fraction of its previous numbers, Roy's career was brought to an end when he had his left foot severed in a terrifying helicopter crash.
Roy had a pilot's licence. He was actually on his way to Well-Tech Sports to scout a young lad that had been recommended to him, and the helicopter itself was there was a fault with it, and it had gone down, and he ended up losing his left foot, and that's how the comic closed on the 20th of March 1993.
It did get a lot of publicity, but once you've done it, what do you do with a major character? It was like someone like Superman having his foot chopped off. That's the end of it. What can you do?
Roy was not larger than life when he started to get accidents in helicopters. He became Joe Normal. He was no longer different. He was average, and that's why the sales become average.
It wasn't Roy's fault. It wasn't a pilot error. It was a mechanical error.
I think that was one of the great tragedies of children's picture strips, that Roy should lose his foot, because I'm sure he could still be playing now.
With his career cut short, little was heard from Roy Race in the years following. Recently, however, interest in the character has returned, and fans are keen to see him return to the football pitch. But could he do this with a missing foot?
I would say he was scouting in Ireland. He's read that the Melchester Rovers are in trouble, that he comes over here and they're in the lower league. They've got to win their last 3 games, and Roy looks around and says, I think I could still do something. I might not be able to run around as much, but you get me the ball, I can still put it in the net. We can win these 3 games. Roy's back.
I think it's no coincidence that since Roy the Rovers stopped playing, England's footballing fortunes have gone downhill. I think if Roy was there to inspire them, the England national team would be doing much better than they are now.
I don't think there's that clean-cut Gary Lineker type person that exists in the modern game. He was there as that sort of inspirational figure, and he was a real footballing icon, I suppose is the best way to describe him.
Roy the Rovers, I really believe that was the best English teacher this country's ever had. She never had any reading problems then. Every child could, because he had to read, because you wanted to read it to know what was going on. Every child could read by the time he was 6. By the time he was 5, some of them. He was that good. He could score from 30 yards.
And so we leave Roy Race, still going strong after 50 years and on the verge of a potential comeback. With some of Roy's classic stories being reprinted, Racy and the Melchester Rovers look set to dazzle a new generation of fans.